Good morning. Thank you so much, August. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Talakov. I am the presenter for today. I am really excited. This is a presentation I've given a couple times in the past. I'm a relatively new. I'm about 3 years into the prevention field, which is ever evolving and ever changing. So I am learning with it. I'm currently a student at IU Indianapolis studying social work. And yeah, what I have cooked up for you guys today is a webinar friendly format of my presentation on healthy masculinity. There's a couple things I want to acknowledge before we begin. One is that I would like to acknowledge that this is a webinar. I struggle being a participant in webinars typically, just because attention span is a thing that I am working on. So I have designed this to be 60 minutes as opposed to 90 minutes. So we may end early. We may take up the full 90 minutes if we're really engaged in discussion, but we may end early. And then the second thing is, I have designed it where, if you would like to participate in the chat or raise your hand and speak, there will be opportunities to do that. However, if you would like to keep your cameras off and pretend that you're listening to a podcast as you're getting work done, this will also work out. I will kick things off soon. I would also like to acknowledge that we are, in a political climate and on land that is experiencing a lot of violence right now. And everything that I talk about in this presentation about, the ideals of what healthy, masculinity will look like and what nonviolence prevention will look like. I hold the opinion that none of that will be embodied as long as we live on land that continues to be occupied in a violent way. So until that changes, this isn't something that I want anybody to have the impression of as, the answer. Essentially. Okay. So today, these are our learning objectives. Number one is we're going to analyze how gender norms are reinforced in physical spaces. Two is discuss universal experiences that have been assigned a gender. And then three is to identify prevention strategies to resist harmful gender norms. So before I continue, there's a little bit of irony here that I'm a man talking about healthy masculinity in a profession that is predominantly made up of people who identify as a woman. I struggle with the term healthy masculinity. That's what most people accept, at least like understand. Truly, what we're talking about is anti-patriarchy. Healthy masculinity still implies that there is a set, list of things that will make someone masculine, which I don't believe there is. So gender norms is more of the language that I'm using here. If there's something that doesn't mesh with you, this is a space we can call it out. I'm a student. I'm pretty accustomed to learning. So this is a space I'm going to do my best to keep casual in that sense. And this is in a space we have to keep our guards up. Okay. Story time. Some context for what I'm about to share. I am a person who was born to Syrian parents. I grew up in California and I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Vietnamese. I went to a public school that was predominantly Mexican. All that to say, I have a pretty immigrant coded upbringing. There was a diverse set of what people considered to be life, vibrancy, color. There was a diverse set of traditions and practices, of values and beliefs. There was also differing views of what is masculine and what is feminine. A light example of that is in American culture. It's masculine for men to wear necklaces. They call them chains. In Syrian culture, regardless of what it's called, if it's around your neck, it's feminine. So I grew up, in American culture, I would wear a chain under my shirt. And then when I'd visit my family overseas, I would take it off because I'm entering a space that has entirely different views. And I'm not going to insist my own on, the majority wins is how I see it. So what that did do, though, is I got pretty used to constantly disappointing somebody, which sounds a little sad, but it was actually really liberating that no matter what I did, there was gonna be a culture that viewed what I'm doing as either, making me less of a man or making me more of a man. And I quickly saw that culture was optional. that really at the end of the day, I get to choose what decides what makes me a man and what doesn't. And I live my own truth in that way. And I'm really privileged to say that my parents really facilitated this for me as well, even just by the name that they gave me. Tala is an Arabic name. Talha is how it's pronounced. It's a feminine name. Tala is a feminine name in Arabic, but it is a boy's name. You will not meet a girl named Tala who's Arab, because that can exist in Arab culture and Syrian culture. Something can be feminine and hold masculine qualities at the same time. A good example of that I can give is the moon. Sometimes we view the moon as masculine, depending on if it's a full moon or if it's a crescent moon, if it's waning or waxing. Sometimes it's masculine, sometimes it's feminine. It just depends on where it is at in the sky and what it looks like. At the end of the day, it's the moon, and it's not changing. It's always on the same cycle. So we that will be a difference between Syrian culture's view of gender norms and American cultures that I will get into. But I wanted to offer that as some context. The other thing in this little story is a little crash course in Syrian history. I'll try to keep brief. So Syria, about 100 years ago, was colonized. Before colonization, for hundreds of years, there was no influence of patriarchy. I should say very little, but little to none. Many of us, including myself, don't know what it's like to live day in and day out without the influence of patriarchy, without feeling that sense of being watched by this colonial idea. So that meant that women owned land, they ran businesses, they worked every job that a man could work. Men and women were paid equally. Religion wasn't used to discriminate between men and women. It was pretty great, to put it lightly. And because it's in Western Asia, it connects Europe and Africa, and it is on the Mediterranean Sea, and it has oil. It's prime real estate for the French. So they came and they colonized, and that is when many of the things changed, and that is what we see the effects of today. So they forced women out of employment, they forced them out of schools, and they basically mandated that if you are a woman and you want to work, you have to convert to Christianity, you have to stop speaking Arabic, and you have to start dressing like us. And obviously, many women did not want to do that because Syrian women are amazing. And so they stayed home. And that turned into, when you don't have school, you don't have work, you become a baby making machine, to put it just as bluntly as possible. My grandmother was part of the generation that suffered this. She got married at 13, has a sixth grade education. And for her, she's, a leader in education. Like, you can become a teacher with a sixth grade education at that time, because that was even that was rare. Most women weren't allowed to go to school at all. So she was viewed as privileged in that sense. And yeah, that's in America, what trickles down through the news about the Middle East is that it's riddled with child marriage. It's, the women are oppressed and they're forced to wear certain things. And this is the context behind that. And this, of course, influenced the way that Syrians view what is masculine and what is feminine. Some of the things I refer to will be pre-colonization and some will be post, because it is two very different worlds now. Okay, America. So, masculinity and femininity in America. It took me so long to learn this. I felt very misinformed when I did. I was born in the States. There's many parts of me that feel American. So I thought I knew this. I thought that by proxy of being in America, I understood what this meant. Maybe, I guess everybody else who lives in America, who has a history of living in America, is already used to this, but this was mind-blowing for me. So masculinity and femininity in America, there's two main qualities. One, that's a little bit more basic, and we probably have heard this in this field before, is that it's a patriarchal list or box. So if you'd like to imagine, one box is masculine, one box is feminine, and inside of it is everything that makes you a man, everything that makes you a woman. People who don't identify as a man or woman by nature live outside of the box. Anything that makes it outside of the box is, under the patriarchy's eyes, deemed as not as worthy. So if being a man means were like owning a Ferrari. Okay. And we'll just use a hypothetical example here. If being a man means owning a Ferrari and you don't own a Ferrari, you're going outside of that box. By the patriarchy standards, you're now less of a man. So there's some real things. So for example, being a man means being able to, being physically strong. And if you're not physically strong under the patriarchy's eyes, you were viewed as less of a man. For a woman in this box, another example, I was actually going to get to this later, but another example is anger. So anger is a universal experience that is inaccessible to women under the patriarchy. So if you exhibit anger, if you express anger as a woman, you are less of a woman in that context. If you experience anger as a man, you are more of a man in that context. So that is like those two boxes I will be referencing for the rest of this presentation. The second thing, this is the thing that blew my mind as someone that, was born here, is I did not know that in America, masculinity is tied to manhood and only manhood, and femininity is tied to womanhood and only womanhood. If I'm a man, that means I have to be like all parts of me are masculine. I've heard this, like, this might sound obvious. I don't know how this is resonating for folks, but I've gone to violence prevention conferences. I went to one in Ohio and they had a like affinity group, I guess, for men to talk about this very thing and call it out. And how it was viewed was, it was talked about. And I'm saying this to say that this is happening in our field. This is happening in our profession. I'm not talking about, the people who still think that women should just stay in the kitchen and, live in the 50s. Like I'm talking about right now in this webinar that, there was a man who believed that as a form of liberation, he said, everything I do, referring to himself, everything I do is masculine. So nobody can tell me I'm not a man. And he was like, that was a sense of empowerment for him. What I didn't realize is that's how it's viewed here, is that everything I do is masculine. If you identify as a woman, everything you do is feminine. In Arab culture, I am masculine and feminine. I hold both things. Being a man is not a significant part of my identity. And that's part of why, the conversations around gender and sexual orientation aren't things that happen, even if you're straight, in Arab culture. Showing that part, like expressing that publicly, isn't something that is done because it's not a significant part of your identity. Whether or not you're married or who you're married to, regardless, you hold masculine and feminine qualities. It goes back to the example of the moon that I gave. Another good example that I like to give is the animal, the gazelle. When the gazelle is in greener areas like a forest or savanna type, it's masculine. When it's in the desert, it's feminine. Same animal. For us in American culture, dogs are always masculine, cats are always feminine, no matter where they are or what they look like. So that is a key thing that I learned to identify that I want to highlight here, that part of this breaking of the box, because that's the ultimate goal, is we want to break the box. We want to also sever the ties that masculinity has to manhood and femininity has to womanhood, offering liberation for people to experience both masculinity and femininity. Once, when we talk about, so they say 80%, this is a CDC statistic, a Center for Disease Control, 80% of violent crime is committed by men, regardless of the sex of the person experiencing the crime. So given that, masculinity, there is something to be said there. And patriarchy was the system made up by men. If men are able to accept that there are parts of themselves that are feminine and that makes them more of a man, or that makes them a better person, then that femininity will also be viewed the same way in women. It will, like, misogyny comes from that idea of femininity is less than masculinity. And if we as men are able to accept our own femininity, then that takes care of the source. That, misogyny would have no basis, if that makes sense. Okay. So those two things about it being from being in a box and being tied to manhood or womanhood has two more things that make it specifically harmful in the context of our field as violence prevention. One, that having it that way, it reinforces colonialism. So it genders universal experiences. A good example I like to give of this is armpit hair. Armpit hair is a universal experience of the human body. However, it has been assigned a gender. It is put in the man box and therefore made it inaccessible to the woman box. So if you identify as a woman, growing armpit hair under the patriarchy, you're viewed as less of a woman. For a man, that means that if I want to shave my armpit hair and not have armpit hair, I am viewed as less of a man. The other thing it does is it reinforces this colonial ideal of if you have more power, I have less power. In order for me to have a voice, you have to stop talking. Two things can't be true at the same time. So back to this example of armpit hair, by assigning it to a box, it makes it inaccessible to the other box. So when we're talking about violence prevention, the concept of power, like as a construct, has been assigned a gender, which is like absolutely like I'm trying not to curse, a mind twist, if you know what I mean. So power has been assigned to the man box. And not only does that then prioritize men in that sense, but it also by nature makes it inaccessible to women. So everything that goes into power, that means actually, you know what, we're going to get into that into the second box here before that. But the assigning it to a box and having masculinity be tied to manhood, femininity tied to womanhood does under colonialism is it creates a loss of connectedness. So in nature, there is symbiotic relationships between almost everything. Humans have a symbiotic relationship with trees. You know, we exhale the air that they inhale and they exhale the air that we inhale. Everyone is individualism. The idea of individualism it's not real, if that makes sense. That's why it's so harmful in the country that we live in, is because it can't happen. Everyone is relying on everything else. Animals rely on each other. I learned this was actually pretty powerful. I learned that in American indigenous culture, they have a saying that how you treat the land is how you treat the people. We have the same exact saying in Muslim culture as Syrians, that just kind of blew my mind on how these indigenous cultures are so interconnected, even though they're halfway across the world. So when you create this, have to be masculine 100% of the time, have to be feminine 100% of the time, you lose that connectedness, the symbiotic relationship that men have with women and have with other people it becomes cheapened, if you will. And men are now looking to other men to feel masculine, and women are looking to other women to feel feminine, and both are adhering to the patriarchy. Of course, I need to say this is like, I'm speaking in very general terms. I'm also speaking strictly under the patriarchy. Many of us may already feel like we're existing outside of that. Again, there's people that by nature live outside of that if they don't adhere to either, to the binary of gender. Okay, the other thing that this does is it creates those power imbalances I was talking about. So because power is assigned to men, it makes it inaccessible to women, and that means everything that comes with power. So there's power in politics, lawmaking. I mean, we literally refer to them as the people in power because they have the power to change our daily lives. They can make our roads better or roads worse. They can make the crime rate go up or crime rate go down. That is a lot of authority that they hold. And so it's no coincidence that in politics, we continue to see men be elected into these positions. As a country, we have never had a woman president, which is more things need to be burned down in order for us to express anger like that. Like the amount of third world, quote unquote, countries that have had a woman president and have thrived with a woman president. And the fact that it's one thing for us to not have experienced yet that. It's another thing for that to be true and also think that we are the best and the greatest and the most powerful in the world. The other power imbalance is the workplace. So employment is associated with power because there's power externally, just in the fact that you have an income now. With money is power. You can start making things move. But also within the workplace, you get promoted, you get different leadership positions, you have authority over people, you have influence over people. that is all something that has been the workplace is changing now, but it's why we still see a gender pay gap, and we still, just a few decades ago, the workplace was major, and still to this day, there are still professions within the workplace that are been gendered. This being one of them, violence prevention work. It has been made culturally inaccessible to men, and uh, it fits more in line with everything that is assigned to the woman box. The same thing with, we see like teaching, nursing, all these fields that have been made more accessible to women are paid less. And that's part of making it less accessible to men because they have this, like, again, all under the patriarchy. This isn't anything I subscribe to, but under the patriarchy, men are like viewed as more equipped to be providers, so they need higher paying jobs. So people, men and women who adhere to the patriarchy, start assigning themselves to employment opportunities under the boxes that they're assigned in. And then relationships. This is the big, interpersonal violence, IPV work. And this is where the domestic violence piece really comes in, the sexual assault piece really comes in. That if power is assigned to me as a man, and I am in a heterosexual relationship with a woman who under the patriarchy, if I'm viewing her through the eyes of the patriarchy, she doesn't have access to power. That means I will become threatened from my own masculinity if she expresses power. So if she wants to pay the bills, if she wants to get employment, if she wants to pay for dinner, if she wants anything with money is associated with power, if she wants to own her own car, if she wants to have her own social circle outside of my own, anything that comes with her own autonomy, if she wants to decide whether or not to see her pregnancy to term, anything that is like she's exhibiting free will, that I'm scared for my own masculinity because I like to say I'm an insecure baby under the eyes of the patriarchy. So a power balance would, in order for that to be sought through, that would mean that the ties between masculinity and femininity and manhood and womanhood are severed. The last thing here is physical spaces. There are physical spaces that we're going to talk about in a second that are designed for men to feel safe and for women to feel unsafe. They have been assigned a box structurally, architecturally. We'll get into that right now. So, okay, this is where I leave some room for participation if anyone feels so inclined. That would be amazing. But yeah, I've dedicated about 10 minutes to really talk about these physical spaces where gender power imbalances are reinforced. I will give an example just to start us off and get the gears turning, and then we'll see where this goes. So, one physical space is the gym. The gym is a place where people go to build physical strength, generally. Physical strength is associated with power, and power, like we said, is assigned to men. So, that means gyms are assigned to men and prioritize men's safety and have no regard for including women in that space. So we see in physically the way that the space is designed, the colors, the machines, the what's the word? I'm thinking like feng shui, the interior design of where the machines are placed, where the locker rooms and bathrooms are placed. Um, have no regard for what makes women feel safe. So that is one example. I'm going to open it up to the room. You're welcome to put anything in the chat and I will go ahead and share it aloud. And then you're also welcome to unmute yourself at any point and we can join in. Car dealerships and mechanics. Yes, 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 yes. Public transportation and cars in general are one, physically built to prioritize men's safety, where the seatbelt goes and how the seat sits and the windshield. But then, yeah, car dealerships are a place where there's a physical business transaction, money is being dealt with. And that is something that is assigned to men. The other one in here is Greek life systems in universities. Yes, part of that is also like a social circle. Once you get also forgive me, I don't fully understand Greek life. This is my understanding of it, is that once you get your letters, you are now part of this group that not only like now do you have access to an entire social empire, but you also have access to the lineage of that empire. So like I'm in the same fraternity as what's his name, Arnold, the guy who was on the moon, Neil Armstrong. With that comes power. If you're in the same fraternity as the president, spa, mostly for women, pedicures. Yeah. So self-care, thinking about that, that self-care has been made inaccessible, culturally inaccessible to men under the patriarchy because taking care of yourself, taking care of your hygiene. I mean, I gave the example of armpit hair are shamed for shaving. Uh, and they would be seen as stepping outside of the box. So yeah, taking care of yourself and your honestly, that also this is kind of I'm going on a tangent here, but that also extends to everything else that you put on your body, fashion, art that you engage in, singing, anything that comes from your body. These are all things that have been um that under the patriarchy, like men are viewed as being less of a man for engaging in those things. And when those are, again, universal experiences, everybody needs to be taking care of their hygiene. I really hope that we're all on the same page. My joke is I really think that if showering was invented today, there would be people against it. Campus dorms is another one. Yes. Honestly, a lot of like campus dorms, actually, this goes into the next one too. Healthcare facilities, I was going to say hospitals, schools, all have very similar prisons, very similar physical structure, in that there's very little color on the walls. The windows all are placed in the same general spaces, the same room in the hospital, the same room in the classroom. What was the other one? And then the same room in the campus dorms. Stores have a bigger women's section than men, making shopping for women. I rarely go into the women's section, but when I do, it is out of desperation because there's so little selection for men. Everything is the same. I mean, I also let me geek out here for a second. The science behind the suit as well, like that was designed for men. The suit was, if you think about like the classic traditional suit, so it's dark in color, and the white cuffs of the shirt would pop out at the sleeves, and you'd get the collar that pops out right by the jacket. Putting white by the hands and by the neck brings attention to the hands and the face. Hands and faces hold a lot of emotion. You can see me now. I talk with my hands. When you're wearing a suit, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but as a man, that movement is restricted. So how much I'm moving my hands, I have to think about intentionally and kind of bring myself into this little physical box that I move my hands in instead of a good example I like to give. I don't know if the camera will catch this, but I used to work in an elementary school, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but what you'll generally see is that when the boys raise their hands in class, they're raising them like this or like this, like it's a very half effort thing. And then the girls are generally fully extended. So there's like this, again, universal experience of just expressing yourself with your body has been gendered. Same thing with your face, much expression you're showing with your face, tears, laughter. It's all something, as Gen Z, how we have internalized patriarchy is praising the idea of being nonchalant, of just seeming like you don't care as a man, like that you don't really show that emotion. If you laugh too hard, that's a little too outside of the box. Yes, sit down restaurants with tipping. That one's interesting. Yes, because tipping I actually haven't heard that one before, but it makes total sense. Again, there's two things there actually. There's the money part of it, is of how much you're tipping and how much you're paying for food. That we gave that example earlier of, a man could feel threatened if if they're on a date or date night and the woman is paying for dinner. But then also food, that nourishing yourself, what kind of food you eat, how much you eat, all of that universal experience. We need to all eat, but that's all been assigned to gender. Sports bars. Hey, Whitney. Couple things there. Alcohol has been assigned to gender. Wine is for women. Beer is for men. Sports, you add that as another nuance, that's been assigned to men. A woman who enjoys watching sports is viewed as less of a woman when she's doing that. Banks and financial institutions. Yeah, again, I think in America, like women weren't allowed to open a bank account without their husband's permission for like up until recently. I don't know the full date. But yeah, that we're still seeing the effects of that today. The streets, thank you. Yeah, the public is designed, just the public square is designed for men to feel safer and for women to feel unsafe. I will close this off for women weren't allowed to vote until, yeah, very recently. Because again, voting is powerful that you're exercising your autonomy. I will end us off with one more example. We'll have one more discussion, but thank you all so much. That was amazing. Another big one actually just ties into voting is the state house. The physical building of the state house has been designed to prioritize men's safety. And I actually have a story to share. Geez, I didn't have this story last time I gave this presentation. I interned at the State House 2 years ago, and it was an absolute nightmare. It was a very rude awakening for me adjusting to American culture. I don't know, many of you may have been to the State House before, but it's divided into 4 wings. Each wing is physically designed the same exact way. So if you're in the East Wing and you spin like 5 times and get dizzy, you could think you're in the West Wing because everything looks exactly the same. You can't see the exit door. Everything looks the same. The other thing is being ADA accessible because it's a historical building. I don't know why that was in quotes. It doesn't have to be ADA accessible, even though it's the people's house and it's meant for all Hoosiers. It's not designed for all Hoosiers, and we remain compliant in that. And that means that if you go into the elevator of the State House, you'll see 4 floors, 4 buttons. There's 5 floors. The 5th floor, coincidentally, is where all the lawmakers go. That's where most of the offices are at. There's a few on the 4th floor, but the vast majority of them are on the 5th floor. And if a person who uses the wheelchair or can't go upstairs wants to meet with that lawmaker, they cannot. Their only option is virtual or for that lawmaker to be kind enough to come downstairs and meet that person where they are at physically. But that person does not have access unless someone physically carries them up there. But the story I wanted to share was when I was an intern, it was like my 3rd or 4th day, and I was in my little group of interns, and we all got lost, unsurprisingly. I mean, kids will come for field trips to the State House. And they even I had a 6th grader point out to me saying, it's almost like this building was designed for us to get lost in. And I said, what an astute observation. But yeah, we got lost as interns. And one of the people, this is relevant. She identifies as a woman. She called it out. She says, guys, I think we're lost. I have no sense of direction. So I'm just following you all. Totally fair. A man. I feel like that says the whole story. Said, well, actually, because you're a woman, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain that makes it harder for you to navigate physical spaces. We were all pretty silenced in that moment. We were kind of shocked, but he felt safe enough to say that. He felt like this was a place that was socially acceptable to say. And the fact that he could say that in the people's house, there's something to be said there about the way that it's designed. Okay. Second little discussion, 10 minutes. Let's keep up the participation if we can. That was amazing. Okay. Now we're talking about so we looked at physical spaces. Now let's look at universal experiences that have been gendered. So some of them have already been mentioned in the chat. Okay, so voting was mentioned. Voting it's not a physical space, it's an experience, which thank you for sharing that. That would fit into what we're talking about here. Let me see if there's any other yeah. So the armpit hair experience was another one that I gave. Spa is a physical space, but the idea of self-care that I mentioned earlier, that would be a universal experience. And then power, that's the big one that we've been focusing on. Power has been assigned to men and made inaccessible to women. So my question to you all, I've dedicated this next minutes to talk about that exactly. What other universal experiences have been assigned to a box? I'll give us about a minute to think, and then if depending on how that goes, we will keep things moving. Business trips. Okay, one second. Okay, yeah. Traveling for work. I mean, work is a universal experience right now. So traveling for work is also a universal experience. But that is something that, there's that classic, I can see it now, guy in a suit in the airport on a call, probably sitting at the bar. That's an image we can think of very easily because that is something that has been assigned to men. Working. Feelings. Yeah, and we talked about anger already, but that extends to so many things. Sadness has been made less accessible to men under. So if I cry, that's the whole like men don't cry mantra. But even humor. There's women aren't funny. Like all these things fall under the patriarchy. Cracking a joke is a universal experience. Sex and sexual violence. Marital rape wasn't a thing until 1993. That's crazy. Women also were taught to be more pure and save themselves. Yes, because with sex, power is divided into authority and influence. And sex falls under that influence part. Is that when you have sex with someone, there's another added layer now to the relationship. You've connected with that person's body, assuming it was enjoyable and consensual, but you have yet connected with this person's body. And so that you now have influence over them as they do over you. Not in an abusive way. It could be as simple as, I love you, so I cut up some fruit for you. That love there's that I've been influenced into doing something, but that can then turn into abuse and sexual violence when influence becomes authority, when we force sex, rape, or withhold sex or withhold our love to be, if you don't stop talking to your friends, I'm going to break up with you. Or there's even like Gen Z, we see I'm going to kill myself. Like we hold this, we give ultimate, like it's threatening. We hold threats to each other as a form of authority abuse. Women can't lead because they're too emotional. Yeah, this goes back into this idea of politics. I'll actually call out something within my own community. In Islam, there is a verse in our holy book, the Quran, that says men are maintainers. And the people who translated who this is the annoying thing. Many people who speak English have internalized patriarchy, just like by nature, but not by nature, by like statistically. And so these English speaking people who are translating, I mean, that includes myself, by the way. I speak English. Like in order for me to speak English, I have to learn English culture, the English speaking culture. And it's very hard to filter out what is patriarchal and what is not because it comes from Europe. Um, but yeah, there is a verse that says men are the maintainers, and maintainers to say that men are supposed to bring stability, which is laughable right now. Yeah, men are supposed to bring stability, women are supposed to bring growth. And together that makes cities, that makes civilizations, that makes families, that makes everything grow. People have now reversed that in Islam, people who translate the Quran, there's this isn't something that my global community, Muslims around the world, like most Muslims recognize that the way this was translated is wrong. And we still have the original text, which is great. But it is out there that people believe that, yeah, men, what do they turn it into? That the men are the leaders, not just are the leaders, but are the leaders of women. Which I don't want that. Like, I don't, this isn't, it's harmful for everyone. It forces, again, this box, getting your nails done. Yes, this goes back into self-care, treating yourself, fashion and art. The military, big time. The military actually can technically be both. It can be a physical space because physical space like barracks and military bases are designed for men, and also just the concept of the military, the concept of defending your country. I am all for defending your country. I am staunchly against the American military. Buying a house or any major purchase. Yes, buying a house, I think that was also another thing that required the consent of a man if you were a woman. That was something I was going to build off of when I was talking about the suit. The suit gave men, and when men are predominantly made up the entire workplace, the suit by design gave men a uniform to fit in to the workplace, so that if I'm thinking, oh, what should I wear as a man in the workplace? I know what I should like. There's no question. You see this today for women who think like, what's business casual for a woman? There's like 50 different schools of thought. Some people believe it's nice pants and a sweater, and some people like there's just so many. There's so many because there isn't, which is great. That means that I'm not limited to one selection, but it also, there's a con to it in that there isn't something that I can belong to when I go to work. But why I brought that up is talking about relationship, like a marital relationship between a man and a woman. If the suit is the work uniform for the man, and the man wears a suit to the wedding, and so does the bride's father, and it's this business transaction. Theoretically, they're going to work that she takes on his last name, becomes his property, and it's an exchange of it's entirely objectified. Again, this is all under the patriarchy. Somebody did say wedding, so this is great. Driving, when married, the man usually drives. Yeah, again, another way that Gen Z has internalized this is we call it the passenger princess. We pretty it up with our lingo, but it is the same, harmful gender norms, just with a different name. The idea of women complimenting each other in the club bathroom. Women openly compliment each other in public. If men do it, they are seen as feminine or gay. Yes, it is a very common sight in the Middle East for men to be holding hands with one another as they walk down the street. Here, if I did that, I've tried with my male friends. It's different, let's just say. But yeah, even just a few kind words, hey, I love those shoes. To say that to a man, I mean, you can get away with it, especially as Gen Z. I can get away with it, but I am still seen as expressing my feminine side. It's not masculine to do that. Planning for celebrations, buying and wrapping the gifts, hosting, arranging travel. Yes. I do wedding. This is so random, but I do wedding florals on the side. So I'm like big in the game of like event planning and interior. Like I love it. I love it so much. I love like planning where everyone's going to sit. And because then you can also introduce that trauma informed part of it. I was like, how can we make sure everybody feels safe? You design the bouquets. That's all I work. I mean, yeah, just like this field, also predominantly made up of women. And that is because all like, attention to detail. Again, it goes into this idea of art being, if a man engages in those things, he's seen as less of a man under the patriarchy. Physical touch, yeah, we kind of touch on that about like holding hands, fidelity versus infidelity, childcare. Yes, parenting. If a woman is parenting her child, she's a mother. If a man is parenting his child, he's a babysitter. This is actually, that's a big, because that goes into family violence and family makeup. We're going to get into that for sure. Someone put in looks like a link in here. It's called Wives and Husbands 22 Wives Submit to Your Husbands as to the Lord. Yeesh. Yeah, this is something that I have touched on when I've given this presentation before. And I try to be, I'm really navigating as much as possible because I'm Muslim and I was colonized by Christians. So like I do understand Christian theology. I have my own feelings about it. I'm also in a Christian majority country. So I have to be really just like meeting people where they're at in this journey of their faith. This is not, I'm not gonna criticize theology. This is not the space to do that. How I do say I do this is I do criticize the men who wrote the Bible. King James audited his own, commissioned his own Bible. He was a man, he was a king. Again, politician, this whole so that's where we see these things like this start to come up and distort religious abuse, essentially, is what it is. This idea of, turning the mother figure, Mary, into someone who, she's the epitome of femininity in the patriarchy's eyes, where she's a mother that's praised under the patriarchy, but she didn't have sex and she's pure and she saved herself, which is also praised. And the father is not really there, if I could say that. And this isn't I'm not making anybody can jump in and tell me I'm wrong. This is that I'm not teaching here. This is a discussion that we're having. So but yeah, the father is somebody that you that is contacted, is called out to, but as far as being physically there, it was acceptable for him to not be there. So we talked about everything that's wrong, everything that needs improving. We talked about physical spaces that have been gendered. We talked about universal experiences that have been gendered. And much of this, I mean, all of what I just spent the last 20 minutes doing is repeating what you guys have been saying. So this is all stuff that is known. Okay. Now we go into strategies on how to actually address everything that we've just talked about. So the big one, there's two. The big one is promote accessibility. So if assigning to one thing to one box makes it inaccessible to the other box, so if assigning power to men makes it inaccessible to women, obviously the strategy there would be to promote accessibility to women. And by nature, what that does is it destroys the box. It severs the ties. and we are living happily ever after. So one way to do that is professional and academic development. So that can look like scholarships, grants for women to go to school, to go to work. Like Dress for Success is a great resource. It's a great, I shouldn't say resource, I should say, is a great example, like of symbolic promoting access. Because Dress for Success is a organization in Indianapolis that provides professional clothing for women, which I was talking about earlier about the idea of women and the relationship between women and business casual, and how that there isn't really something to plug yourself into to feel like, um, there's a sense of belonging in the workplace. So Dress for Success is an organization that addresses that. I can give an example, like in Middle Eastern countries, women are paid to go to school. Like if you think about in America, you have to pay tuition to go to school. Like I'm talking about university. In the Middle East, the university, like you are being paid to go and get degrees. And so there are high graduation rates, and there's also high rates of degree holders. So like I'm not wording this right. The number of degrees people can hold is higher. Here it's typical that you get like probably 2 degrees in today's economy. But there's people have many over there because it's free. And then affinity groups and spaces, so creating safe spaces, safe groups for people to come together and talk about this. So the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, they are a good example. They're how I kind of started on this violence prevention journey. They I don't know if they still do it, but they do monthly affinity groups. It's specifically designed for people of color to come together and just say all the things that they feel unsafe to say outside of those spaces. I gave the example of the affinity groups in Ohio, where in these kinds of like webinars, they'll do breakout rooms, they'll go in physical breakout rooms as well. There'll be spaces for men to just get together and talk about, because it is, it's lonely, not just in the field as a man, but it's mainly lonely outside of the field, that in order for me to be passionate about this thing, it's pretty like I don't relate, that means to a lot of men in my life. And so that's something that men get to talk about, spaces for people with disabilities, spaces for the queer community to come together. And by doing that, you're creating accessibility to call out all these things that have been in the box. And then third thing is incentivize boundary setting. So, okay, this kind of goes into the last one here. This is a webinar. Usually I do this in person. Many of us are probably familiar with the golden rule. We probably learned it in elementary school. I did. And I learned that it is like, I went to elementary school in California, and I met people here who learned the same thing, which is, treat others the way you want to be treated. As the golden rule. What's being proposed, like I said, I worked at an elementary school recently, and that has not changed there, but I have seen this change like in spaces like this, where instead of treat others the way they want to, the way you want to be treated, it's, treat others the way they want to be treated. And so in order to do that, that means that you have to ask them, how can I treat you? Like what are your needs? How do you have fun? How do you practice repair after a mistake is made? These are all things that if that becomes, the golden rule is such a big part of school education culture, that if treating others the way they want to be treated becomes such a pivotal part of the culture as well, then we're normalizing boundary setting. We say, oh, this is not how I want to be treated, or this is how I receive love. Children can start learning about love languages when they're children rather than when they're ready to be in a romantic relationship. And then, okay, the big one, paid family leave. Yes, Whitney, you mentioned childcare. So, and we talked about this idea of fathers being babysitters instead of parents. So paid family leave is another initiative that decreases violence, that has been proven to decrease domestic violence. And it also normalizes this idea of fathers being parents. Because if you create, universal paid family leave that is just, we're not talking about, oh, you gave birth, here's 6 weeks. We're talking about you get time in that fourth trimester to really be there for your family. And same for the father in the relationship, that makes it more accessible for men to be fathers because, bills need to be paid. The house needs to keep running. The place that we live, people still need to continue to eat food, and everybody has their own means of doing that. Whether you receive benefits and whether you receive an income, it needs to come from somewhere. There's different family dynamics. That's why in a lot of, Middle Eastern cultures, people live in multi-generational households because it truly does take a village. This isn't, I mean, in an ideal world, it wouldn't just be two people raising a child because that's a whole human being. That's a whole other presentation. But yes, paid family leave is a giant step forward in that. The last thing here on this list is addressing physical spaces. So all the physical, the gym, the state house, all the spas, all the things that we talked about in the chat. We talked about specifically things that we talked about safety specifically, what spaces make one gender feel safe and the other gender feel unsafe. And we know in this field that when we want to design a space that makes people feel safe, we take a trauma informed approach. And so many of us may already have resources to what that looks like, what a trauma informed approach in interior design is. I've listed a few here. So BTCC Bloomington is building a thriving, man, I forgot what this is, building a thriving something community, connected, I want to say, connected community. They have some really great resources on what a trauma-informed space looks like physically. St. Jude House is the first domestic violence shelter in Indiana that has published its address. And so they've been around for a while. They are also one of the first to implement a full-fledged mobile advocacy program. But I have gone there up there personally, and so I could just give my personal testimony that and you could also look them up, but they have really been intentional about where their funding is going to in regards to their physical space. So their same model is very versatile and can be applied to any other physical. It could be applied to the state house. Somebody asked in the chat, can you expand on incentivizing boundary settings as promoting accessibility? So setting boundaries, this idea of self-care is inaccessible to both boxes. And what I meant by the golden rule is I use the golden rule because it's something that's taught to children, and children are one of the best learners, sponges. They're learning everything. So it's also early in their lives. So incentivizing boundary settings can also look like, in the workplace by normalizing setting a boundary between a boss and an employee, between even like in a marital relationship. It's by incentivizing boundary. It's I guess what's throwing me off and what may be throwing you guys off is the word incentivizing, because really it's what the core of it is it's not criminalizing setting a boundary, because that's the world that we live in right now, is that by setting a boundary, by telling your boss, hey, I'm having a baby, not even that. Maybe it's in your interview and you say, I have 2 kids. That's seen as, risky for your employer, because that means you're going to have other things outside of that could take away from work. So yeah, celebrating, honoring, it's essentially in the same way that we're creating physical spaces for people to feel safe, we're also creating spaces for people to feel safe enough to set a boundary. So when people set boundaries with physical touch, with I'm trying to think of I'm having a major brain fart and I apologize, but set boundaries with physical touch, with sex, with language of hey, don't use that word around me, instead of this being viewed as, distance of oh, they don't want to be friends anymore, or she's mad at me, or they aren't as committed as an employee. It would be viewed as they're taking care of themselves. And my perspective on how to normalize that, because I think there's a lot of ways to do it. And by the wise words of someone I know, it needs to be multi-pronged. So it needs to be in the workplace and in relationships. The easiest way I see it being done is in schools, because once it's taught to children, they carry that with them. I am the age that I am, and I still carry with me the golden rule because it was so drilled into my head as a kid. So if that is something that is also honored as, being golden in schools, and teachers teach how children should interact with one another in that regard, then that is something that can be carried through into their adult life, and that is also reinforced then in when they're in university. Actually, that's a great example. Now I feel like I can actually answer the question. In school at IU Indianapolis, if I need to uh, So people are given 2 to 3 weeks off at school for Christmas. When I have my holiday as a Muslim, I have to request months in advance for those couple days to be off. I don't. So the Muslims go by the lunar calendar, and the lunar calendar cannot be predicted in the same way that the solar calendar can be. So I don't know if my holiday is going to fall on. I can give you a ballpark, is what I tell my professors, but I don't know which day exactly. And there's no room for that in university. There is no, celebrating that. There is no making space for that. And that is just something that, um, by making space for it, would further sever the ties between self-care and masculinity, and self-care and femininity. Okay, follow up. Aaron asks, is the distinction here allow personal set boundaries, treat me as I want to be treated, as opposed to the boundaries set by society for all? Ooh, yes. Okay, so I'm going to be fully
I
honest.
don't know if I'm clear here, and I don't mean to belabor the point or take everybody's time, but I guess where I was having a problem or wrapping my mind on things is it seems like the boundaries that are set are actually the way I would describe it is there's a boundary, for example, between academia or you were talking about this field, there's a gender boundary as there someone has said that it should only be for women, and most of everything else is there's a boundary to the political system and power that it's all for men. And
I
so when you were saying incentivize boundaries, I was getting a little bit confused because those are what comes to my mind when I think of boundaries at first. So
I see what you're saying. Yes, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you asking. This means that you want to know, which is cool. Yes, I mean personally set boundaries. So August, that just sent in the chat. That's a good way to differentiate it: boundaries versus expectations. So when I say boundaries, yes, I mean the personally set boundaries. So between, yeah, like within a relationship or within schools or workplaces. And then what you're talking about as far as structural systemic boundaries, those would be, yeah, like the expectations of the I'm happy. Yeah, totally. But yeah, that would be the the boxes that you're talking about. What's accessible and inaccessible, those are more of the expectations that we also want to get rid of. And by incentivizing those personal boundaries, those structural ones also become weakened as well. One. So this work of boundaries and, severing the ties and promoting accessibility, one, again, I'm going to reiterate, it will not work as long as we are on stolen land. It will not work in the way that we want it to. That's not to say that, we can't do anything. And that's not to say that, like everybody has to go back to Europe or something. But that's just to say that if we want it to look like how we want it to look like, which is zero domestic violence, zero sexual assault, like through the roof with healthy masculinity, zero patriarchy, if we want that, basically, that won't happen, in my opinion, until we are no longer on land that is stolen, violently occupied, violently. There needs to be an entire restructuring of how we occupy this land and how we honor the indigenous people. And both things in this case cannot be true at the same time. Again, that said, the work within ourselves can begin. I count you all at different journeys in your learning, unlearning. But my encouragement to myself is to, day to day start being more intentional about what is it that is universal that I have personally gendered. So the biggest one for me, not the biggest one, but the main one that I have focused on, I started small, has been flowers. I've always viewed flowers as for women. And so I've just been extra intentional at Kroger or, Lowe's or something, to go to the garden section, go to the flower section, and get just some flowers for my home. And it's small, but biologically that causes a shift in the way our minds work. I just identifying these small little things, because we are all in this profession. We all have, I mean, if you're in this webinar, you have a passion for violence prevention, for you're in the realm, you're in the loop of sexual assault prevention. So you're doing the work of showing up and contributing back into society. And so that's why I just always like to emphasize within ourselves as well, that many times we don't have access for somebody else to do that work for us, and that many times has to be, the work has to come from us as well, even though that's something we share with everybody else. So yeah, to just identify, working down the list that we have in our little internalized patriarchy selves of what is it that I can start with, or what is it that I can continue with? Because chances are many of you have already. I mean, what I realized with picking flowers is that I've already kind of started on. I mean, just being in this field as a man is starting to undo some of that work. So it just brings those things to light. On things, you get to pat yourself on the back of things that you've already realized you've been doing this whole time, and also getting ready for new challenges as we continue to navigate our current political climate. And that way, that when the patriarchy does die, because it is dying right now, we are ready to join in the new world, ironically is what I'll call it, but join the new culture that will be born afterwards. We can hopefully be pioneers in that culture, and we will be able to influence it in ways that will really bring all the goals that we've been working towards of nonviolence and domestic violence to fruition. And that is all that I have for you all today. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm gonna drop you might all have my contact information already. I forgot what I've already made accessible, but I just dropped my email in the chat. If any of you have questions or want to follow up or even want to meet and talk about this some more, totally feel free to pop into my little inbox. And I'm excited. This is my favorite topic, honestly. It's the one that, like, every time I talk about it, I learn something new about it. So stay tuned for sure. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, August. So my name is Sharon Birdsong. I am the Prevention Education Coordinator here at ICASA and the Indiana Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And at the coalition, we offer a sexual violence prevention program called SUSOP. So Speak Up, Speak Out. The SUSOP program is designed to increase the engagement and education of young men in its efforts to change rape culture and help sexual assault. The program breaks down manhood and masculinity, traditional manhood and masculinity. We aim to create a safe space to foster conversations that lead to real internal reflection and change, helping make men the solution instead of the problem. So the SUSOP curriculum is a customizable curriculum that is made up of 6 modules that all are about an hour and a half long. Each module builds on the following, with the first module being the introduction to SUSOP and survivor empathy, module 2 being healthy masculinity, module 3, healthy masculinity or healthy relationships and bromance, module 4, intimate partner violence, sexual assault and rape culture, module 5, sexual violence in the digital world, and module 6 is a congratulatory module where we celebrate and really reflect on the student or the student's progress with the previous modules. And then quickly, some of the topics that we discuss for the Speak Up project, and you'll see on this program flyer that we have created, we discuss sexual violence and rape culture, healthy masculinity, positive relationships, male allyship. And some of the benefits is learning, connection, perspective changing growth, intervention and advocacy, male mental health awareness, learning your emotional intelligence or building upon your emotional intelligence. And so again, my name is Sharon Birdsong. And if you have any questions, I can put my email in the chat about the SUSOP curriculum, and I will be around for the remaining time that we have.